Mismanagement, injustice, and poverty. We're talking about Africa, the cradle of humanity, a place where a child dies every single minute. To give you some perspective, get this: California, just one state in the US, has a bigger GDP than the entire African continent. That's 54 countries combined. But today, we're not here to shed light on Africa's devastating state. No, we're going to find out the root causes of Africa's struggles and why its road to development seems like an endless uphill climb. If you're into this type of content, hit that subscribe button because we're all about bringing you the raw, unfiltered, and unapologetic truth. Now let's start with the reasons of Africa's poor fate. The number one reason of Africa's economic demise is none other than their corrupt leadership. It's a harsh reality we can't ignore. While it's easy to point fingers at others, let's take a hard look at the leadership within many African nations. Corruption isn't a foreign concept here. It's become an unfortunate part of the political landscape. We're not just talking about the power struggle, that's expected. The real issue arises when leaders hold on to their positions for far too long, sending shockwaves through the economy. Public funds, intended for the common good, end up being funneled into private pockets. The list goes on, and unfortunately, the current leadership of African countries is lathered with crimes against humanity and stealing from the national treasures as well. Hence, it is impossible to assume a prosperous Africa when such corrupt people are the decision makers. Now, let's shine a spotlight on reason number 2 that's casting a shadow over Africa's economic landscape: growing foreign debt. It's a story of dependency, one that sees many African nations rapidly accumulating foreign debt. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with seeking financial support for development projects, but the scale at which this debt is piling up is raising eyebrows. Many African countries are leaning heavily on loans to fund their initiatives, resulting in a staggering total debt in the trillions of United States dollars. That's not pocket change. But here's the bigger problem. Instead of reaping the benefits of these projects, a significant chunk of the budget is funneled into servicing these hefty debts. The consequence? A direct hit on the economy through the very projects that were meant to uplift the nations. The third critical factor that's been hindering Africa's potential progress is weak African unity. It is a continent divided along colonial borders, where the dream of African unity seems elusive. While we can't turn a blind eye to the historical complexities, the reality today is that African nations often struggle to collaborate for their mutual benefit. Instead of fostering internal cohesion, there's a reliance on external aid from the likes of the United States, China, and the European Union. The current state of African leadership is marked by fragmentation. The will to unite the continent into a formidable force on the global stage is, unfortunately, lacking. If there was a stronger sense of cooperation among African nations, the potential for progress would be immense. However, the present scenario paints a different picture, one where financially strained nations find themselves at odds with each other. Now, let's shine a light on the fourth reason casting a shadow on Africa's economic trajectory: lack of technology advancement. Here's the deal. While the rest of the world is zooming ahead in the tech race, many African nations are still relying on manual labor for tasks that could be streamlined with technology. It's a classic case of being stuck in the analog era in a digital world. The cause? The lack of significant progress in technological advancements across the continent. Sure, there are pockets of innovation, but the overall pace is lagging. This stagnation not only puts Africa further behind the curve, and it also steers off potential investors. Investors are drawn to places where technology fuels progress. If Africans aren't using advanced tech on their home turf, it raises the question: why would an investor set up shop in a place that's not keeping up with the times? Now, let's shine a light on another pivotal factor that's been holding Africa back: poor infrastructure. Here's the cold truth. Neglect from African leaders over the past decades has left many countries grappling with inadequate infrastructure. Think about it. Proper roads, reliable electricity distribution, well-equipped education facilities, and accessible hospitals. These aren't luxuries, they're essentials for a thriving society. The result? Daily life becomes a struggle. The lack of these fundamental building blocks not only impedes progress, but also adds an extra layer of difficulty to the lives of ordinary citizens. The heart of the matter lies in the neglect that has allowed this infrastructure gap to persist. Unfortunately, the urgency to change this status quo is often missing. Now, let's confront a heartbreaking reality that's been haunting African nations: food insecurity. In most corners of Africa, people grapple with hunger daily, and the consequences are dire. The situation has taken a grim turn, with some preschoolers so malnourished that attending classes becomes a distant dream. Here's the stark truth: Africans aren't asking for the moon. It's as simple as wanting 3 square meals a day, ensuring their children have a shot at education, and aspiring to lead better lives. However, the harsh reality is that this basic need for sustenance remains unmet for many. The crux of the matter isn't just the lack of food, it's the deeper issue of a seemingly unbreakable cycle. Now, let's turn our attention to another critical factor: unjust trade structures. Here's the deal: unequal trade relations are exacerbating the economic challenges faced by Africa. Rich countries are essentially exporting capital to poorer African nations, reaping massive profits that unfortunately don't trickle down to benefit the local populations. The core of Africa's economic struggle lies in its heavy reliance on exports. This leaves the continent vulnerable to the unpredictable ebbs and flows of the global market. The trade structures are set in such a way that it only benefits the powerful nations or the leaders in Africa. The average African citizen is left empty-handed at the end of the day. These rich countries have put restrictions on poor African nations, which doesn't allow them to freely change the trade structures without the risk of getting sanctioned. Hence, unless Africa is free to put their resources to use the right way, they have no head start on the rest of the progressing world. Now, let's tie it all together in a nutshell. One pivotal aspect that echoes through each of these reasons is the historical failure to industrialize. Unlike other regions that underwent robust industrial revolutions, Africa faced a complex interplay of factors that hindered its industrial progress. While Europe and other continents surged ahead in technological advancements, Africa lagged, struggling with a lack of infrastructure, poor governance, and insufficient investments in education and innovation. This industrialization gap has left African nations dependent on raw material exports, making them susceptible to the volatile swings of global markets. As the world evolved into the digital age, Africa found itself on the sidelines, grappling with manual labor and a dearth of technological innovation. The consequences are evident: corruption thrives, foreign debt mounts, unity falters, and basic needs like food security remain unmet. The wars and crises, unjust trade structures, and a persistent lack of industrialization have become interconnected threads, weaving a narrative of economic challenges that seem insurmountable. So, here we are, peeling back the layers to uncover why Africa, despite its vast potential, finds itself ensnared in a web of complexities. And that wraps up this exploration into the reasons of Africa's economic demise. Feel free to comment your thoughts, suggestions, and how you'd think Africa can catch up to the rest of the world.